Hello and welcome everybody to this channel and Dr. Arminio's channel on Rumble. So we're going to talk a little bit about economics, particularly regarding the United States, which is, of course, very important to the rest of the West. As far as dollar is concerned and all other factors. Not in the least after the Munich conference, there are some discrepancies between the United States and Europe as far as handling affairs globally. So without further ado, Dr. Arminio, where do we start?
I guess to talk about putting Iran, the actions of the president's Iran policy in context. And to do that, I would draw the lens of history far back and say, I believe we are pressuring Iran, the same reason we pressured Venezuela, and we pressure a lot of other countries around the world, to maintain what is called the petrodollar system. The petrodollar system goes back to 1974. In 1974, Kissinger, the Nixon administration, negotiated with the Saudi Arabians, and the arrangement was that Saudi Arabia would sell oil exclusively or nearly exclusively in US dollars. This is a very important part of it next, and they would then recycle their excess US dollars that they were earning from the sale of their oil. They would recycle it through Anglo-American banks, London and New York. Well, what happened is this was done because the Nixon administration had closed the international gold window. America had, I'm afraid to say, abused the Bretton Woods international trade arrangement, which dated back to 1944. Up until 1971, we were supposed to be exchanging a dollar for gold with a foreign government, foreign central bank, if they so chose to do it. As of 1971, we stopped doing it. And so as a replacement for this, we launched this petrodollar system. And this has driven U.S. foreign policy ever since. The other driver would be, of course, containing the Soviet Union and Communist China.
Okay. What about the state of the United States Treasury or the Federal Reserve or the nation?
Well, in a very bad way, our system is based on debt-based money. And we have a situation now where the only thing backing up the US dollar are treasury bonds. So we lend money to back up our money. And the debt has gotten enormous. We now are given the so-called everything bubble. I think this might be a good point to share with the viewer, that first chart, or the historical chart of the debt as a share of GDP. So we've gotten to this situation where the debt load is just too high. Interest payments are exceeding revenue coming in.
If we go to the interest payment graph or chart,
it's here. Next. No, let's do that. Maybe let's do that. There we go. All right. So this is from the Federal Reserve, St. Louis, one of the Federal Reserve banks, or the Federal Reserve System. And this blue line is interest payments over time that the federal government must make on the treasury bonds. So you can see that up until 2020, so that's way over to the right-hand side of the chart, maybe way over 20 in the year 2020. You can see that you're on the left-hand side. And what he's doing right now is he's showing you that, Mr. Bergmark is showing you that this is interest payments in billions of dollars. So in 2020, that's what the vertical axis is. With the horizontal axis, and here he is now, we're in 2020. We were paying $600 billion in interest payments, which is an enormous amount. Well, we've doubled that payment in just a few years. It's now about 1.2 trillion. By the way, these gray lines are supposedly the indications there. He's pointing at a gray line there. What would that be? Is I can't tell from this. Is the global financial crisis of 2008. That's supposedly a recession. Of course, it was a terrible recession. You can see that in 2020, the Fed's telling us on their chart that the recession was very brief. That's not true. The recession's been going on all this time. And I say that because I draw upon a very important source. I recommend everyone get in touch with this individual. It's Shadow Government Statistics by John Williams. He's out of California. And he's a very good economist. Other economists trust him, and I rely on their say so. And his data shows that American inflation has been double digits since before 2020. Mm-hmm. The government has been lying about this. And therefore, there has not been an inflation-adjusted growth, real growth in U.S. GDP since 2020. Has all kinds of profound complications, including the balance of power between our country and Communist China. In any case, that's what we're trying to show here, that the interest payments have gotten completely out of control. So you can see on the chart, if we go back to, 1970?
Yeah.
We'll be back. The interest payments are very small, and you can see what's happened. Things have gotten out of hand. They were bad in the 2000s, 1990s, 2000s, but still relatively running what was at about $400 billion, and then things got out of hand after the global financial crisis.
Mm-hmm. And this is $1 billion. So let me point that out.
Yeah, this is billions of dollars. So what does $1.2 trillion, which is what we pay now, relate to? Well, think about it. The federal government is taking in revenue $5 trillion approximately, and it's putting out $1.2 trillion. When a government, this is a general rule of thumb, when a government puts out 25% of its revenue in interest payments, it's about to collapse. And so we're running in the low 20s as a percentage of revenue coming.
Well, let's say the 1/5 approximately of
right
the
total
budget is interest payments alone.
Yeah,
that's quite alarming.
Yeah, a touch above, it's low 20s, a touch above 20%, and 25% is the yeah. So we're in that danger zone.
Yeah, and then we have this phenomenon of. Let me see that one. Also, I want you to comment on this one here, which shows federal debt held by the public, by individuals.
Well, and yes, and also foreign holdings. This is all debt. This is public debt of all kinds.
All right.
That includes foreign holdings. So this is a chart, again, I'd recommend everyone look at it. Where does this come from? The Congressional Budget Office has been running this chart for a long time. So a lot of things to understand first off. So you see the pink, that is debt as a share of gross domestic product. So the left hand, or the vertical column on the left, that's debt as a percentage of GDP. And then,
so it's over 100% projected.
Well, right. Yes, projected. Right. Right now, it's roughly, you can see he's pointing out around near 2025. It's roughly where it was at the height of World War II. Mm-hmm. You see the difference, though. After World War II, we came down briskly. We came down briskly until in the 70s, we came down to about 35% of debt as a share of gross domestic product. So in a debt-based money system, which we have, this is considered quite healthy. Well, you can see what happened since then. There's the Reagan buildup, defense buildup in the 1980s. So we bumped up a bit, then we came back down again until we come to George W. Bush's first administration. We're down about 40%. But then toward the second term, toward the end of the second term of President George W. Bush, you see a doubling in the blink of an eye, the doubling of debt as a share of gross domestic product. So it goes from 40% to 80%. That's the global financial crisis of 2007, 2009.
Yeah,
and
right here.
There is where he's pointing now. So now we're in trouble. We're now starting to approach World War time levels of debt. Well, it gently ratchets up some, and then we have this straight shot up into 2020, the so-called pandemic, where it increases about 25% to now where it is now, 100% debt load. And there you see Congressional Budget Office is saying that if President Trump's policies were to continue out to the future, we would eventually hit 150%. Well, the economy long gone before that. So what we're saying is, when you get to 100% debt load, this is another indicator that your margin for error is gone, or it's very, very slim. Remember the first chart we just looked at, interest payments are almost 25% of federal government revenue. Here's a chart telling you your debt load's at a 100% level. You don't want to go any higher. if we go to war against Iran, we were talking about that before we started the show. My concern is that we'll go vertical. It will add at least another 25% debt as a share of GDP to that chart. We're now living, 130% GDP debt load in the benign. In other words, what will happen in 2007, in 2020, could happen in 2026. You could have this enormous spike. It's not good. This one we could not absorb. We don't have the margin for error.
Yeah, but the U.S. is not alone about this.
No, it's not. And because of that, people keep using the good old dollar. They keep using the U.S. dollar.
But France, for example, is right now at 120% debt in relation to their GDP. And similar situations are in Germany and throughout the European Union, with the exception of a few nations that keep their federal spending under control.
Where is Sweden right now?
We're in a pretty good shape, but just today we have a financial institution that's created to control what the government is doing with federal or national debt, called Finanspolitiska rådet, Financial Politic Council. They criticize Sweden to bank on borrowed money for the future. And right now, the situation is not that grim. I would guess, this is a guess because I haven't looked up the figures, somewhere around 25-30% of GDP is right now debt, which is not bad, but it's increasing by the minute because of further financing of the war in Ukraine. So,
what is Germany doing? They're talking about going into debt to a degree they hadn't before in order to finance military buildup.
Yeah, well, Germany is the worst, probably. France is the worst, but Germany, being a large economy to begin with, is going the same route. Increase in debt, making it hard for their core industry with high energy prices, things like that. The car industry in Germany is on the brinks. It's really going bad because they're betting on electrical. And nobody wants to buy their electrical vehicles because they're expensive and you don't save the planet.
Yeah, that's correct. This is a climate change hoax.
Yeah, it's the narrative of climate change.
That's right. There's something good that President Trump has done. He's taken us out of the Paris Climate Accord.
Absolutely.
It's a good thing he's done. He's done a lot of good things. He's taking us out of the WHO. And so, But by the way, if we go to war against Iran, rather interesting, we've talked about the risk that the debt load would be too much for America. Well, Germany, France would sit that out. So they might actually end up in a much, much stronger position if we go to war against Iran. The same thing with Communist China. And by the way, with Communist China, I mentioned before how we're suffering double-digit inflation, if you believe these shadow statistics, and I think they're correct, not the 3 or 4% inflation rate that's telling us. Communist China right now's GDP is equal to America's. Now, this has other interesting implications, again, in the context of Iran. People say, the American defense budget is just too big. It's the gorilla on the world planet compared to everybody else's. Well, just a minute now. Because most of our military actions occur on the other side of the world. We're in the Western Hemisphere. You folks are in the Eastern Hemisphere. We usually, think of it this way, this is a crude approximation. For every soldier or airman or sailor that America deploys, or ship it deploys, or tank it deploys in Eurasia or near the perimeter, the rimland of Eurasia, it has to have 2 in the pipeline. 1 in transition, going back and forth, and 1 that's doing major overhaul. How does that respond to money? Well, we're spending now roughly $850 billion on defense. That's nominal dollars. Of that, about $100 billion is on our strategic nuclear forces. So let me simplify. Roughly, America is spending $750 billion on defense right now. You say, my God, that's enormous. But just a minute. For every dollar in effect of defense spending that we commit on the rimland of Eurasia, we need to spend $2. to get that $1 deployed out, say, into the Western Pacific. Whereas Communist China's at home. The battle, the war would be waged in their theater of operation, in their backyard. For us, it's a great distance away. That means take America's conventional defense budget of $750 billion and divide by 3. That's $250 billion. And that's really what we have to deploy off to Communist China's coast. Communist China's spending supposedly $250 billion. You see how it's a matchup. But then, when I look at the inflation America has been running since 2020 or even before then, we don't have the equivalent of $250 billion defense budget deployed just opposite Communist China. We have less than that, much less. So this inflation has big consequences. America's spending $750 billion on its conventional forces, but that's really more like $500 billion of actual weaponry and equipment that you're paying for. So there's a lot of things here that are not coming to light. The government is trying to hide from us, from the world. We're not as strong as we seem to be, and even if you look at the numbers they're providing us, as we've just talked about, we're near the end of our debt capacity. Our margin for error is so small.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Europe as a whole is in any better position.
Shape, no.
We have another graph here. I think it'll be the last one we'll show for this program. Did we show this already? I don't think so. Yeah, we did. So let's see.
Not that.
Yeah, not that one. Here, this one we have not shown yet.
Yes, this one. This one is frightening and also very intriguing. This is going to take a little explaining so the viewer can follow us.
Please
this
do.
Is one I did this one by hand. This one is for copyright proprietary reasons. I couldn't use the chart that I pulled this from. What you're seeing here is interest. This is interest-bearing debt, U.S. government interest-bearing debt maturing in 1 year or less. This is probably, the most important of all the charts, or the most important of all the data, or one of the most important. So this chart is showing you what percentage of GDP is U.S. government interest-bearing debt maturing in 1 year or less. I have a hard time saying this, but we actually have, as of this year, $10 trillion of U.S. treasuries are maturing in 1 year or less, and we have to match up a buyer and a seller. And it turns out, you can see I have it red there, U.S. bond market crisis 2022, 2023. In 2022, 2023, we had a hard time matching up buyers and sellers of treasury bonds. It was at $7.6 trillion in 2020. You see the highest point of this chart. Maybe Mr.
Well, I guess that's the pike you see here in the graph, in the line.
Yes, he's got his arrow pointing at the highest mark. At that point, that's in 2020, remember all the commotion, the trouble of 2020, America had $7.6 trillion of treasury bonds maturing in 1 year or less. They had to find buyers, sellers for that amount of money. The revenue, the U.S. GDP at that moment was about $21 trillion. So you see how that approximates at 38% of our GDP. It was too much. We couldn't do it. Within about a year, we had this terrible crisis. Remember, what is backing up the U.S. dollar? It's treasury bonds. What had happened to the integrity of the U.S. dollar? It was shot. If the dollar is to be maintained as a world-reserve currency, if it were to maintain the integrity of the dollar, we have to be able to sell treasury bonds fluid and at par value. But at that time, in 2022, 2023, if you wanted to sell your treasury bond, you might have accepted a loss of 1/3 to 1/2. And we'd have a hard time finding anyone even then to buy them. So a lot of people just didn't sell. They just held on. That's not fluidity. That's not maintaining the integrity of the dollar. That was a catastrophe. Now you can see what happened now. He's going to take his arrow and point down a little bit to about where 2022. All right, so it dropped down, what is that, maybe 28% that the U.S. Treasury bonds maturing in 1 year or less at that time was maybe about 28% of GDP. So we're trying to repair the damage. The Fed's trying to repair this damage. And you can see that the next several years, we we did some repair, but it's rising up to now where it is today at 31%. So we've got $10 trillion of treasury bonds that must mature in 1 year or less. Our GDP is 31 trillion, so there you are, about 31% GDP. You see how we're inching up again to the danger zone?
Yeah.
So what I would suggest is, that there's this window of opportunity that President Trump is operating in. He's not at the 38% level. He has some room for maneuver, but how much does he have, Mr. Berger? How much does he have? Not much. He's got very little room for error.
If it's at around 31% now, and pointing this way, I assume this is not a prognosis. This is fact, because the graph ends.
It's rising. It's moving toward the collapse level. It's rising.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you listen to what people who track the Treasury bond tell you, they say, "Oh, the market for Treasury bonds is stable." Stable, okay, but rising back toward the danger zone. So remember, in 2020, that's a crisis. That's a black swan, as the economists would say, something that came out of the blue. So going to war against Iran, a major war in Venezuela, some other disturbance, that's another black swan. Some pandemic, some other catastrophe, that's a black swan. We'll go back up again. There'll be another debt crisis. The world's already seen that we didn't maintain the integrity of the dollar back in 2022, 2023. A lot of people say reserve status, the U.S. is gone. And that's why you have these alternatives, especially BRICS, coming up, talking about having a new currency to replace, or at least to be running side by side with ours. You folks in Europe thought about doing it in the year 2000, right? The euro, you were talking about a petro-euro. We've been talking about a petro-dollar. We've had a petrodollar for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Petro-euro was offered as a replacement to the dollar in the year 2000. And by the way, in 2000, I understand that the French talked Saddam Hussein into redenominating the sale of his oil from US dollars to euros. And that's why we invaded Iraq and overthrew.
Yeah, in 2003, yeah.
Yes, because remember, if there's a competitor to the petrodollar system, America's dominance is over. And we would not tolerate. This is the so-called neocons that I think, Mr. Bergmark, you and I don't like very much. Really, what is a neocon? I was thinking more about that. Neocon is someone who will uphold, maintain the petrodollar system at all costs, including by force. And they did it in 2003, and they're about to do it, or they may be doing it now, vis-a-vis Iran, in 2026. I think this is a good point, a transition to talk about the foreign holdings of treasuries. And the reason I say that this is a good point, remember if we go back to that last chart that we saw, and we had that drop off from 2020 down to 2022, maybe go back to it again one more time.
Which one is that? That's this one, right?
The very last chart we put up, that you put up.
No, we go back. Okay.
Not to that one.
Yeah, the one we had last was this one.
Okay, this one. All right, so remember we talked about that we peaked there at 38%, and then within short order, within a few months, we triggered this bond market crisis. What did it take to trigger that bond market crisis? Well, at that time, foreign holdings of U.S. treasuries was about $7.7 trillion. They unloaded about $500 billion of bond, and that was enough to cause this disaster. Now, right now, foreign holdings of, that's why I say this is a good transition point to talk about foreign holdings. Right now, foreign holdings, these are foreigners who hold U.S. debt, is about $9.4 trillion. So if they were to dump $250 billion or $500 billion, we'd be right back where we were, other bond market crisis. So who are the people that hold the bonds, and what are the solutions? What is the Trump administration trying to do to get us through this danger point? That would be, we should not talk about the foreign holdings. So right now, we have $9.4 trillion of debt held by foreign entities, mostly governments, also foreign individuals. And of this, the biggest holder is Japan at $1.2 trillion, and they've been roughly at that level for a very long time. The next biggest, or I should say roughly at that scale, was Communist China, wasn't it? And back in 2013, Communist China held $1.3 trillion of debt. Well, they're down now to about half that, to 680 billion or so billion dollars of U.S. Treasury bonds. And the word out, didn't it? The word went out just, was it a week ago, that the Communist Party of China advised its banks to cut back the holding of Treasury bonds. Don't take on any more and start to prove what you have. They're going to go even lower. So remember, it only took, so what, $500 billion of bond unloading to cause that bond market crisis. Well, who's going to pick up the slack if they do that? So who's the next biggest holder? So we talked about China was the number one holder of Treasury bonds at 1.3 trillion, but that was in 2013. They're now down to half that. Japan's been staying level at 1.2. UK is at about 900 billion. And then then you have Red China. Then there's this big drop off in foreign holdings. So who would pick up the slack if Communist China actually goes through with its threat? And by the way, Larry Johnson's done some very good work. I know you bring him on the show all the time. He's done some very good work talking about what Communist China has done economically to retaliate ever since Trump abducted Maduro. So the last month and a half, and I did a video on this too, relying significantly on Larry Johnson's good work. Red China's made a lot of strategic moves, economic moves, not military, but economic moves to punish us, to try to wake us up, get us to draw back from what we did in Venezuela. What are we trying to do in Venezuela? The same thing we're doing in Iran, which is maintain the petrodollar system. What is one of the things that the Trump administration can do to maintain the petrodollar system? Well, one thing is applying force, keeping Iran more in our petrodollar system than out of the system. So we should step back for a second here. Iran has been slowly, inch by inch, moving away from the dollars, from the petrodollar system. It made a big step to leave us on January 1, 2024, when it joined BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa system. We didn't like that. We didn't like that at all. And I think, in part, this armada that the Trump administration has amassed off Iran shores is to let them know how unhappy we are. And in fact, we'd like to change the regime, wouldn't we? Get the Pahlavi dynasty back in there, the Shah of Iran's descendants back in power the way it used to be before 1979. That would help defend the petrodollar system. I think that's really what's driving our policy. Well, what else can the Trump administration do besides waging war, which is not a very good option, because you can see if we wage war, we're risking collapses. He cannot do that. Well, he can threaten, he can, he can beat his chest. There's some limited military action he can take, but more than that is very dangerous. So what can he do? Well, he can now use this thing called cryptocurrency, right? Stablecoin. So how does that play? Yeah, how does that play into everything? Well, right now, if the holders of stablecoin were a foreign power, they would be what I think in the top 12 of foreign holders of U.S. Treasury bonds. There are $263 billion of Treasury. Now, I should say, I got to back up a minute. There's right now in value $263 billion of stablecoin worldwide. Not every dollar stablecoin is backed up by a dollar Treasury bond, but it could be up to that. But roughly, you have Japan at $1.2 trillion of Treasury bond ownership. You have the equivalent stablecoin of 250 billion approximately. So it's a lot of, it's a significant amount relative to other holders.
It's about half China's.
Well, no, about a third China's, right? Roughly about a third China, right? Taiwan is in the top 9, and Taiwan is about 310 billion. So you see stablecoins getting closer. Can we give you any historical back? Well, yes, we can, because stablecoin just 2 years ago was 110 billion. So we've more than doubled the amount of Treasury bonds that stablecoin is soaking up. See, the problem with the petrodollar system, you need to have an appetite, a demand for Treasury bonds. And so this is one of the beauties of stablecoin. The more people who use stablecoin, the more there is a need to back up the stablecoin dollar with the Treasury bond. And so you're increasing the demand for Treasury bonds. Remember, that's the name of the game. That's the name of the petrodollar game. What backs up the dollar? Treasury bonds. If more people use electronic dollar, there's more need for a treasury bond. So in a sense, the stablecoin is an extension of the petrodollar system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how far can you go with this? And is there any disadvantages? Well, there are a lot of disadvantages. But how far can you go with this? Well, right now, $250 billion of stablecoin are owned by people around the world. How many people? 500 million people are using stablecoin. So that's more than in America. That's more in Europe, right? A lot of these people are in the global south because their currency is coming apart. So they're looking for something that is not being attacked by the U.S. or is not being trampled upon, and they use stablecoin. So think about this. If 1 trillion people worldwide used stablecoin, that's very conceivable. 1 trillion. How many people do you have in the population? I'm sorry, 1 billion people use. How many people live on the planet? Was it 8 billion of us on the planet Earth? So 1 billion people use stablecoin, and they use $10,000 of stablecoin per person. How much is that? I think that's $10 trillion of stablecoin, right?
Mm.
That's what that comes to. Remember, right now, we need to find buyers and sellers for $10 trillion of debt maturing in 1 year or less. If I could get people around the world, not just America and Europe, Sweden, America, but elsewhere, to use $10 trillion of stablecoin, I've got a huge replacement. Let the foreign holders dump their dollars. I've got a replacement for stablecoin. This is why the Trump administration and most of the Congress pushed stablecoin so heavily last year. But there's a problem too. The first problem is the biggest problem of all. Stablecoin will digitize our money and lead to digital financial control. And I fear it's slaveless. It's a backwards slave.
Yeah, it's about control, unfortunately.
Yeah, so you see, in the short term, it's a good thing, right? In the short term, it staves off a debt collapse, debt crisis. But in the long term, or even the medium term,
well, the European Commission, a European unelected, powerhouse, they're talking about also converting the euro to electronic.
Yeah.
But for different reasons. Reason is just one and only control.
Control.
That's it.
Yes, European.
Unfortunately.
Yes, and who's the most advanced in the use of central bank digital currency? This is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's China. And who wants to do it too? Iran.
Yeah.
See, there's another interesting thing here. If you want to change the regime of Iran, you only have a limited time to do it. Because if they get what Communist China has, if they have the kind of financial control that Communist China is building in their country and Iran has it there, you won't be able to loosen the grip of the Iranian regime. Assuming you want to do that. But why do you want to do that? I would argue because you're trying to maintain the petrodollar system. That's really what's driving you. I guess I know Iran harasses Israel and so forth, but really what's driving this thing? I think it's the petrodollar system.
Yeah. Well, I listened to Larry Johnson once more today, and he got the question from Judge Napolitano about why and when the U.S. will go in militarily against Iran. And he said, not right now, but it's imminent. And what Trump has said is basically, if Iran is willing to negotiate, we will not attack. But they've been doing economic warfare against Iran for a long time with, these kinds of things they're trying to do to Russia that have been trying for a long time with all kinds of sanctions and things like that, stopping trade. But nobody wins, in my opinion, with this philosophy. It's better not to.
What we need is to solve the debt crisis.
Yeah.
That's a longer discussion. There is a way to, I think, to solve this. By the way, I think it's important to understand that Trump's Iran policy is actually almost a smooth continuation of a policy that goes back to the 90s. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that. Back in 1996, Donald Rumsfeld, remember now, he's in between being Secretary of Defense, right? He's Secretary of Defense for Papa Bush, or George Sr., Bush Sr., and he becomes Secretary of Defense for his son, W. Bush. Well, in 1996, Donald Rumsfeld authors a paper. Maybe you can tell us, Mr. Bergmark, I sent you I can't remember now the title of it. I think it was Changing the Guard or Striking Out. Let me see if I can pull it up. This is important to get that couple of these. Let's see if I can pull it up. A couple of these titles correctly. Now, let's see.
It was not this one, right?
Let's see. I think I've got it too. Oh, there, I found it. All right. In 1996, are you putting it up on the screen? Because I'm reading from my...
Well, this is the National Coalition for Defense document.
Oh, okay. No, not from that. No, not from that.
That's another thing, but that's go on, just explain it.
Yeah, that's my own defense coalition back in the 90s. No, I'm talking now about something called a clear break, a new strategy for securing the realm.
Yeah.
Now that was authored, that's Richard Pearl, excuse me, not Donald Rumsfeld, I misspoke. Richard Pearl and Douglas Feith author this thing, but they will be instrumental in the Bush W administration. They'll be architects of the invasion of Iraq in 2003. What is this clear break? Richard Pearl is advising Netanyahu, who's just come into office, to break with the Oslo peace process, go to war, wage war, including against Iran. You've got problems in Syria, beat up on Iran. If you can loosen Iran's grip on Syria, that'll solve your border problems. What's he really trying to do? I would think he's trying to turn Israel, our ally, really our client state, more against Iran and trying to have a stronger military presence that we can manage in the Persian Gulf. In other words, we're trying to keep the petrodollar system together by force. Because by the mid-90s, we are abusing the arrangement that we had entered into with the Saudi Arabians. Remember back, the petrodollar system goes back to 1974? Well, it's an agreement among gangsters. And as gangsters do, they have a falling out with each other. Right? And you watch the movies, there's always one gangster left alive. They kill each other off. Well, America's abusing this petrodollar system for 20 years by the time we get 1996. And we see where this is going. We used to offer concessions. There were some advantages to being in our petrodollar system. We took care of, the clients in Sweden and others in the global South countries. But then we began to take less. We were less forthcoming, less cooperative, more selfish. So by the mid-90s, the neocons are saying, look, we've got to accept the fact that we can only keep the petrodollar system together by force. And that's the origin of this document. Now, here's another document that comes up in year September 2000. This is the Project for a New American Century. And by the way, this is an aside. When this group comes along, and most of the people in that group will actually be instrumental in the George W. Bush administration. So my defense coalition, National Coalition for Defense, is running side by side with these people. We're of a different breed. We're not neocon. But a lot of our military recommendations are not unlike theirs. But we don't have the same view as they. That's an aside. But in September 2000, the Project for a New American Century will put out a document called Rebuilding America's Defenses, Forces and Resources for a New Century. Ms. Bergmark, can you see that long excerpt I have? It's worth reading. Yes, no?
No.
Okay, I can see it. Let me read it. May I read it?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, this is from the September 2003 document from a private think tank called Project for a New American Century. But this private think tank is going to continue the recommendation of Richard Pearl, 1996, the one that we just listened to, and it's going to be instrumental in George W. Bush's administration. And so this is the excerpt from their document. Quote, the United States has sought for decades to play a more permanent role in Gulf regional security. They mean Persian Gulf regional security. While the unresolved conflict with Iraq provides the immediate justification, the need for a substantial American force presence in the Gulf, that is the Persian Gulf, transcends the issue of the regime of Saddam Hussein. Precluding the rise of a great power rival is very important. That's part of it. And they end up by saying, and this is crucial, the American grand strategy, which they're suggesting near 2000, must be pursued as far into the future as possible, end quote. I would suggest that President Trump
That this was before 9/11. This was
Yes, that's right. Good point. Yes, that's a very good point. This is before 9/11.
yeah,
This
it was the factor that excuse to invade in 2003.
That is correct. There's no weapons of mass destruction here. There's no attack on the World Trade Center. No, this is way before this. This goes back to 1906. They know the petrodollar system can only be maintained by force of arms.
Yeah.
That's right. Also, this document's coming out in September 2000. It's in November 2000 that the French talked Saddam Hussein into redenominating the sale of oil from dollars to euros. So this document even precedes that.
Yeah. Well, I've seen that Saudi Arabia has already sold some of its oil in Chinese currency, yuan.
Yes, there's a talk of a petro yuan. Yes, the rival to the petrodollar. Yeah, that's right. So again, right, Saudi Arabia is one of the principal gangsters that makes this deal with us. Kissinger, right, 1974, and then they're already they're talking now about leaving the dollar. Well, BRICS is trying to woo them away from the petrodollar system.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia has one foot in their camp, one foot in our camp, but they're watching us. And of course, what's flying overhead? Israeli, American-made, but Israeli piloted aircraft.
Yeah.
And pushing a B-2 strike, and they're looking above and thinking, "Oh my God, hope nothing drops on us."
Yeah, and then the United States has one of its biggest, largest military positions in the small country of Qatar.
Yes.
So, which is also a large oil producing nation, and not controllable, in my opinion. But, sir, we're running out of time.
Okay.
Very interesting to talk to you, and I hope we'll do it again, because there's much more to unravel. And please go into Dr. Arminio's Rumble channel called America Resurgent, which means revival, basically.
Yes, America Resurgent with Dr. Joe Arminio. That's the full title.
Yeah, I found it immediately when I just wrote Dr. Arminio. So go in there, check it out. I hope you put out some more interesting videos there, and you and I will have a very good reason to do this again. But thank you very much for today.
Well, I would welcome that. Yes, and our good friends in Sweden, we have a tough road ahead.
Thank you.